Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to another Psych 1000 lecture, and today we will be going over Chapter 11 on personality. So without further ado, let's do, and let me call up the screen, and here we go, Chapter 11 on personality. So in terms of a personality, we will define what personality is and then look at some of the different major schools of thought about how to approach understanding what is personality, how to measure it, and also if we understand someone's personality, what does that tell us? Yeah, um, it can tell us give us some pretty important information, which allows us to make certain predictions about future behavior. Alrighty. So first of all, when beginning, let's define personality. Personality of is a relatively pervasive way of relating to and thinking about, yeah, the world, and yeah. So I think that basically captures it. A relative, not a set way, but it depends, right? We have a certain personality at work, a style, but it may vary somewhat at home and at church. Yeah, if you're described as an extrovert, yeah, it's relatively pervasive. You're probably kind of a people person, kind of engaged with the environment, but it certainly will vary, right? You're not going to be the same extrovert at a party as you are when you go to temple or mosque. Alrighty, but it's a relatively pervasive way of relating and thinking about the world and also oneself and others. Okay, we can skip this stuff. Oh, and I missed this thinking about feeling and behaving. Alrighty, so one's beliefs and attitudes, their general emotional state, or and there's not one emotional state, but general pattern of emotions. Yeah, some people being more happy-go-lucky, some being more uh, adventurous, some being more conscientious, some being less so, more engaged, less engaged with people, warm, cold, and behavior, right? Showing up on time, not giving a damn about showing up on time, smoking marijuana and not smoking marijuana. All of these are related to different personality styles, yeah, or patterns. Now, in terms of explaining why personality arises as it does and how it arises in different personality styles, we'll look at different perspectives on personality. And one that is helpful to look at is the theory of first psychological theory of personality. Yeah, and what we're going to be referring to is Sigmund Freud's classic model. Alrighty, now just at the get-go, I want to make it abundantly clear that Freud's theory about personality, yeah, and personality functioning is not empirically well supported. Yeah, it has actually weak empirical support in terms of the theory. Okay, but his ideas and some of the observations were genius, and actually, as later and better explained by other theories, yeah, some of these ideas, some of the way it's been reconceptualized and pursuant to other theories or frameworks, yeah, um, has though some of these ideas have been have received greater support. Yeah, but in terms of his original theory, yeah, weak empirical support. But some of his observations were actually quite keen, and so let's look at some of those ideas. Okay, one idea is this idea of consciousness. Yeah. So Freud posited that there were three levels of consciousness: the awakening conscious state, and the unconscious state, the stuff that we're aware of, yeah, like you're hearing my voice, and so on, versus the stuff we're not aware of, yeah, like our motives, particularly sexual or aggressive motives, yeah, and that these motives and so on cannot come to awareness. Okay. And there was also the pre-conscious idea that there's certain material that we're not thinking of, but if someone were to, but if given certain stimuli, can come to conscious awareness. So, for example, if I were to ask you to think about last year's Thanksgiving dinner, boom, you might be able to remember who you were with, even what you may have eaten, how you felt that day, and so on. That's pre-conscious material. Stuff out of your awareness now, but can be brought up given a certain stimulus, like my asking you to think about last year Thanksgiving dinner, or maybe you see someone and she or he brings up some memories from middle school. Okay. Um, Now, currently, there is a lot of research in terms of what consciousness is. It's a huge area in psychology, and it's an area which we really don't understand still. Yeah, and also things that are out of our awareness, and apparently there are, and research seems to show that there's a lot of things we can learn and ways we behave, which are separate from our conscious state. Yeah. Now, it's not the same as Freud's classic theory in terms of the idea that things that are unconscious relate to forbidden wishes and desires and so on. In terms of this empirical support for that, weak. But the idea of consciousness, though, is still with us and being explored. And there's a lot of research supporting that there are things that we are both conscious of and not conscious of. Freud also posited that there were different ego structures, yeah, personality structures. Besides the levels of consciousness, that there are these different um, personality structures or organized constructs. The three main ones for him are id, ego, and superego. Okay, the id reflects basic needs and wants. It's often referred to as the part of the personality structure that contains the pleasure principle. Yeah, seeking sexual pleasure, food, body comfort, all that kind of good stuff. Alrighty. Versus, I'm going to flip to the other jump to the other personality structure, the superego. The superego is that part of ourselves that internalizes social norms, yeah, laws, rules, mores, practices, how we're supposed to eat, think, dress, talk, what we say, what we don't say, all the rules of society, yeah, or as Freud often referred to, all the rules of civilization. Yeah. And then the other personality structure is the ego. Yeah, and the ego is the personality structure that tries to moderate. It's kind of the go between the id versus the superego. Yeah. So if you want to be sexually gratified, um, or you want physical hunger to be gratified, what are some realistic ways, according to social norms and culture and civilization, by which you can get those needs met in an adaptive way? Yeah, you just can't reach out and grab someone or reach out and grab food, right? You got to society sets out certain rules. So how do you take into account society's rules and your needs and modulate the two demands in a reasonable in an adaptive manner? Okay, so these are the personality constructs that Freud set forth. Now, how did the personality develop? Well, the personality developed pursuant to what he referred to as psychosexual development. Yeah, and psychosexual development refers to the idea that from the day we're born, yeah, that human beings, the human organism, is driven by certain forces, drives, motivations. Yeah. And a big focus of his was libidinal drives. Yeah. Now, libido um, is often associated, and rightly so, with sexual needs and desires. But for Freud, it wasn't just limited to sexual desires and wants, but just general life affirming behaviors. Yeah. So the desire to make contact with people, to be breastfed, is not sexual in nature, but it's certainly a way to make contact. Yeah. With a loving parent, here being the mother. Alrighty, but also crawling towards people, making eye contact, all that are libidinal energies focused on making contact to feel pleasure and so on. Okay, and that energy Uh, if in an environment which is supportive, patient, which provides structure, yeah, rules, but in a patient, balanced, compassionate way, leads to normal development. But what Freud posited is that um, if something traumatic occurs at some point during early development, from infancy through childhood, that energy, yeah, which drives us to touch or crawl towards someone, becomes fixated, yeah, kind of like stuck, kind of like water being stuck in plumbing, and that's stuckedness leads to psychological symptoms. Okay, again, poor empirical support for this notion, for this idea. Yeah. That said, what he was probably, well, I dare say, right on with, was the idea that childhood matters, that we learn things early in life, which we may continue, which may generalize later, um, and that trauma has an impact on the brain. Those ideas are still with us, and they're important ideas derived from Freud's original notion. Okay, again, good observations, but how he conceptualized them, problematic in terms of having poor empirical support. Yeah, and that you don't have this oneness, libidinal energy, right? But you certainly, what we are, by way of evolution, by way of DNA, yeah, oriented towards making social contact with others. Yeah. And we know that the infant, if deprived of social contact, even physical, just a mere physical contact, the body warmth, yeah, that affects brain development. And there's evidence for that, scientific data to support that. Yeah. Now, Freud, as I mentioned, uh, postulated this model of psychosexual development across um, four major stages: oral, anal, genital, and phallic. Oral, anal, phallic, latency, and genital. Okay? Now, in the oral stage, what he posited, and again, this is the, the characteristics of this developmental stage model, weak empirical support, but again, some of the observations are kind of interesting. Um, in the first stage, the oral stage, that occurs in the first year of life, what he posited was that this libidinal energy was focused around the mouth. Yeah. And so our he posited that infants focus on the mouth, and needs are surrounded around the mouth. So the focus of pleasure and sensations are around the mouth. And so, which makes sense on another level, because that's critical to infants, right? For survival, feeding. Yeah. And for Freud, one area of particular focus was breastfeeding, yeah, or making contact with a loving object, here being the mother. Alrighty. Now, if a trauma occurred, right, some intense negative event occurred to the infant during this stage, the libidinal energy would be focused around the mouth, and we would see symptoms or behaviors related to that stuck energy around the mouth. Yeah. So you'd see problems later in life related to things such as substance abuse, like alcoholism or eating disorders. Yeah. DPD refers to dependent personality disorder. Yeah. So if a trauma occurred in infancy, you're more likely to see features of dependent personality disorder. Yeah. So someone needing support or validation. Oh, excuse me. Okay. Okay. Sorry about that. Um, Back on track. um, oops, sorry, my apologies. Let me get out of here and call up the screen. My apologies for that disconnect there. Uh, And now we're back on track. Okay. Um, the next stage is the anal stage. Now, the anal stage, I know, kind of an odd sounding stage, um, but it was called as such because, just very on point, uh, Freud saw that libidinal energy was focused around the area of the anus. Okay, now why? And that pleasure would be derived around the area of the anus. Okay, now we're not talking about sexual, adult sexual pleasure. What we're talking about is the focus of pleasure derived from expelling feces, right? Or relieving oneself. Alrighty. So initially the focus is on feeding, but once, after a year of life, what Freud saw was that in about the second or third year of life, the infant is now the child, right? Um, from infancy usually refers to first year of life, and then after that, early childhood. In early childhood, the focus of energy is on um, the anus because what the expulsion of feces uh, represents for the child is control, yeah, being able to relieve oneself and so on. Okay, but also this is a very critical period, a critical not critical period, maybe is the right term, but critical at time, because this is where the child has to learn toilet training. Now, toilet training isn't just learning to poop into the toilet. It is that, but it's in a larger respect. It's about being able to take care of one's needs with respect to society. Yeah, the society now here being represented by the home. Yeah, and family rules. Because maybe when you're an infant and you're in diapers, right? Mom and dad were fine about you pooping in your diaper, right? Someone would clean your butt. And you'd be that little king or queen, and that someone would wipe your butt. There was a time in your life someone wiped your butt for you. But after about a year, people aren't going to be so keen on doing that. They're certainly not keen on doing that forever if they can avoid that, right? So they then have the young child, right? They proceed with toilet training, directing the child to expel their feces on their own into the toilet, right? And often children resist this. It's kind of a scary experience for many, and others and for many it becomes this issue of control, right? How they want to manage their body versus and now how society's saying they need to manage their body. Alrighty. Now, through patient, compassionate, structured parenting, right? Most of us go through this. But Freud would posit that if toilet training is a traumatic event, or if a traumatic event occurs around, on, or about this time, yeah, that libido will be kind of fixated around the area of the anus, okay, and that we would see symptoms related to that. Alrighty. So, for example, if someone experiences a trauma on or about this time, we would see symptoms related to control, such as being OCD and so on. Okay, moving right along. Well, with that, what we're going to take a break right here, and we will continue in a moment. So let me get out of here. And okay, everybody, thank you. I just had to take a moment or two to take care of something, but let's move right along with where we last left off. And last we left off, we were talking about Freud's stages of psychosexual development. The third stage he speaks about is the phallic stage, which occurs between 4 and 5, right before people enter kindergarten. And this is referred to the phallic phase as the phallic phase because the libidinal energies are focused around the genitals. Alrighty, and for Freud, this is a period of gender development. Alrighty, this is where we have the infamous uh, Oedipus complex. And what is the Oedipus complex? Many of you may be familiar with it. It's the notion taken from Greek mythology that little boys want to have their mothers as life partners. All right, want to have them as their wives, um, and despite well, not despite, but by having these feelings, they soon grow to fear their fathers, fear they fear the competition they're going to have with their fathers in terms of attaining or keeping their mothers. And they fear that their fathers will cut off or castrate them because their penis is what's driving them to want to have their mother. So to avoid castration, males decide, okay, I can't have mom, so I will find a woman of my own. And how do I find a woman of my own? I be more like dad, take on his characteristics. That's the idea. Um, Not a well-supported theory, but that's the idea. But the observations were kind of keen observations, because this is a period which now, through developmental research, we find there are a lot of gender identity characteristics which are learned and acquired during this period. No, they're not driven by sexual attraction for the mother, but they are driven by, probably driven by motivation to adapt, to conform, and so on. Recognition of roles and the importance of them in the individual. Yeah, the electro complex is the female version of that. Yeah, but instead of obviously, not obviously, but obviously for the time, because Freud would focus on heterosexual relationships, and he saw homosexual relationships as being pathological, which we know is not supported by science. The electro complex was the idea that little girls wanted their fathers, but realizing they can't have their fathers, they become more like their mothers. That's the idea. Okay, so the theory pretty well supported. The observations, though, were good observations, and there is support for gender identity development, particularly during this time. The fourth and fifth stages include the latency phase, from 6 years to about 12 or 13. Yeah, with a focus on a development for the individual is kind of at a standstill, and the focus is on acquiring knowledge and uh, learning how to function in society. Yeah, particularly through education in the school system. And then finally, during adolescence, the genital stage, where we have a return of libidinal energies to the genitals, but now towards in the direction of adult sexual behavior. Alrighty. I also want to put a little proviso to my description of Freud's theory by noting that even Freud recognized that any of these feelings of sexuality that he proposed, that infants through childhood, children in childhood, I suppose the children in adulthood, children experience are not like adult sexual um, behaviors, okay, or thoughts. It's the same energy, but because they're in children, they manifest themselves differently. Yeah, so he was kind of clear that it wasn't to suggest that, you know, a 2-year-old or 4 or 5-year-old has adult will start having the exact same sexual feelings and act towards the mother like a heterosexual male, but it's driven by the same energy, which is with the organism from day one. Yeah, so that's the idea. What kind of bypass defense mechanisms? Let's talk a little bit about Freudian personality theory as applies to treatment, and in particular, the assessment of one's of personality. And from a Freudian perspective, we can come to understand the individual psyche, their personality, by way of particular assessment um, approaches, which are tightly connected to his theory. One is that of free association. Yeah, the idea that if you allow people to freely express themselves with minimal interruptions, you're more likely to get ideas of what's going on or insights into what's going on in their unconscious. Yeah, again, the person's never aware theoretically of what their unconscious drives and wishes are, but a third party, right, like the therapist, can get insights or ideas as to what might be going on inside the person in their unconscious by the way of free association. Yeah, one way is by coming up, generating some words and asking the patient to talk about the first words that come to their mind. Another is by the way the treatment was conducted, in terms of psychoanalytic treatment, the way Freud did therapy. Here you see a picture of Freud's therapy couch. Okay, the client would lie on the couch, yeah, facing a wall, which would have no objects would be a blank wall, and Freud would just have the person lie there and for, I believe, about an hour, um, just talk about whatever comes to mind. Yeah, with minimal interruption from the therapist. The therapist would typically, Freud would typically sit here, right? Patient facing that way, Freud facing this way, so that they're not making eye contact, so that the person is only speaking from themselves, from their feelings, from, and hopefully, and that invariably the unconscious speaks. Alrighty, that's the idea. The other way Freud, the other window into one's psyche that Freud developed was the idea of dream analysis. Yeah, that the unconscious could also express itself when the conscious state wasn't in operation, typically during sleep. Yeah, and that while we're asleep, our dreams are manifestations of the unconscious wishes, drives, and so on. Okay, fantasies, and the big thing for Freud. Yeah, if you had to like reduce Freudian dream analysis to one word, it's the wish. What is the wish? Yeah, and that through dream material, you can get a sense of what the person wants. Alrighty. So, for example, if someone wakes up from a dream and is upset because they had a dream that they were attending their father's nightmare, yeah, nightmare. I'm sorry, attending their father's funeral. Yeah, depending on the dream, yeah, a classic Freudian hypothesis is that the dream of a funeral actually expresses a wish. Yeah, it may be for a wish that the father were dead, or if not literally dead, that some aspect of them would be dead or not living. Yeah, maybe something that's upsetting the patient. Another technique that was derived from this theory was the idea of transference, and this is the notion that patients transfer the underlying wishes and and desires onto their therapist. Yeah, with the idea that the therapist, because the therapist represents someone of authority, power, who's caring for them and understanding them, that the patient, whatever wishes, feelings, fantasies they have about their parents, that they're also going to feel towards the therapist. That's very interesting. So the idea is that even though initially the patient, while not really knowing the therapist, might not have any significant feelings, as time goes on, you know, maybe not a whole lot of time, the patient will start having certain feelings, and that different patients have different feelings, fantasies, wishes towards the therapist, and whatever, and the nature of those wishes, feelings, and fantasies tells you something about their psychological functioning, their personality makeup. Okay, well, that's generally the idea. Now, there's also been a large group of psychological tests which are still commonly used, regrettably not empirically supported, but still commonly used, called projective tests. Now, projective tests arise from a projective hypothesis. And the hypothesis is kind of like with the idea of free association. Yeah, and the analytic, psychoanalytic SOFA. Yeah, the idea that if you present someone with ambiguous stimuli, like a blank sheet of paper, a picture with not a clear storyline behind it, yeah, that people invariably project or communicate or kind of express their inner wishes and fantasies onto the ambiguous stimuli. Yeah, that they can express it in some way. So, right, for example, with an ambiguous stimuli like a blank sheet of paper, and if you ask the person to draw something, yeah, that the unconscious will express itself through the drawing. Alrighty, if you show someone a picture, an ambiguous picture, it's not too clear what's going on in the picture. And if you ask the client or patient to tell a story, they will tell a story invariably that reflects something about what they unconsciously want. Okay, so that's the idea. Um, an example of a projective test is the Rorschach ink blot test. Yeah. Rorschach had developed this idea based on a, I think, Swedish children's game. And the children's game involve dropping a little droplet or two of ink onto a piece of paper, folding it, and then talking about what you saw in the ink blot. Rorschach came up with the idea while working in a psychiatric institute that perhaps not only, perhaps that this childhood game might work with patients and that maybe patients might imagine or see different things. And so he applied this game to a number of different types of patients, some suffering from schizophrenia, some depressed, some having more anger issues. And he found that different patients tended to see different things. So here's an example of a Rorschach ink blot test. Um, so typically the client is asked to look at the ink blot and say what they see or what they imagine seeing. Yeah. After they say what they imagine seeing, like do they see a bat or a pumpkin face or what have you, they're also asked to describe what about the blot made it look the way it did. Was it the contours of the shape? Was it the shading? Was it the color used? With the idea that all these characteristics tell you something about how people think and feel about ambiguous stimuli. And here's another example. It's not one of the actual ink blots, but it's very similar to the type of Rorschach ink blot that would be shown to a patient or client. Another projective test is the thematic apperception test, or TAT. In the TAT, a subject, as described previously, is shown a picture and is told to make up a story and to describe what they see, what the characters are thinking and feeling, and and describe a beginning, middle, and end to the story. But the idea that whatever story they come up with may tell you something about particular uh, ego struggles or conflicts that the individual may be experiencing. Yeah, here's one card. The first card in the TAT, probably I think the most popular card to administer, and you can tell when you look at the picture, right? It's not super clear what's going on, but the client or patient needs to make up a story, right? So some clients or patients might come up with a story about a young man feeling stressed because he can't perform the violin as well as he'd like to, but then he practices and pleases his parents. Right? Somebody else might make up a story that here's a young man, he's having a hard time balancing schoolwork and playing his violin, and he wants to play his violin, but then he puts it aside, focuses on his schoolwork, and so on, out of fear that his parents are going to punish him if he doesn't get an A. Yeah, two very different stories. The idea is that each story tells you something different about each person. That's the idea. Here's another card. You can make up a story too, and others. Okay. Now, the incomplete sentences test involves the presentation of words and a blank after the word, with the idea that clients are to complete the sentence. And how they complete the sentence, again, tells you something about how they're experiencing things. And in particular, with the incomplete sentences test, how they are dealing, with stress. We'll go through these right quickly. The other one, and we might get back to when we meet face to face and discuss these matters. The other projected test is house tree person, where the examinee is given a blank sheet of paper and they're asked to draw a house, a tree, and a person. The idea that the drawing, the creative act of drawing, tells you something about what's going on inside the individual. And the idea, kind of as with the other projective test, is that the examiner interprets the response kind of like how an individual appreciating a painting gets a sense of what's going on in the individual artist. It's kind of the same idea, that what's being expressed tells you something about the person. Okay. And with that, that's all I have to say about Freudian theory. Now, and again, with the projective test, very commonly used by psychologists, but regrettably not well supported. But so why are they still being used? Well, psychologists are just like other human beings. You know, they like to do what they like to do, and a lot of people, psychologists, like to use these tests because it makes them feel like they're learning something about the individual. Okay, now some may, but the science doesn't support that that's the case. That people will accurately be able to make valid interpretations of what's going on in the individual. The empirical evidence doesn't support that. The Rorschach is a little different. There are mixed findings with it, in particular in terms of determining a problem that's referred to as thought disorder. Okay, but we may get back to that issue later in the semester. Okay, so the Rorschach has some support, but even then, compared to other tests, yeah, not as well supported as objective tests of personality. Now, another group, so that was one school of thought, yeah, this theory, Freud's theory, and generally that theory as it relates to assessment and our understanding of personality, that's a traditional theory. I've made it kind of clear the limitations of it, but some of the observations that were important and still investigated based on other theories. Yeah. Another school or approach and a very popular one now is trait theory. Now, the way trait theory operates is very different. It's not concerned about the individual's childhood. It's not concerned about any theories of libido and so on, or relationships with mother and father. What all it's concerned about is collecting data. Yeah, of behaviors. Yeah, and when we talk about behaviors, we're talking about tons of specific behaviors, like going to a party or showing up on time or hugging and holding hands and all those behaviors, and seeing if all those behaviors are correlated with each other. Yeah, there is a form of correlational analysis called factor analysis. Yeah, which the way it operates is that it looks at the co-relationship among um, dozens, if not hundreds, of variables, and sees whether all those variables kind of group together, if they have things in common such that they correlate with each other into larger factors. Yeah. So, for example, very simple example, but I think it nicely illustrates it. Things like poems, stories, vocabulary, another language, all would factor into a factor that we could call verbal ability, whereas things such as map reading, drawing, um, uh, arranging pictures, doing puzzles, could factor into something we could call visual spatial ability. That's the idea with trait theories, that they look at tons of different behaviors and see how they factor into different traits. Yeah, and the big theory right now, which has received support from hundreds of empirical studies, is the Big Five theory of personality. Yeah, we'll look at the Big Five in a moment. But the idea is that there are five main factors, or five characteristics, which account for a lot of personality functioning. Yeah, the Big Five include and here are each of the main factors: emotional stability, extroversion, introversion, all of these on a continuum, by the way. Openness, which is characterized by being curious and open to new ideas and things. Right? It's also versus being closed off and not being curious and wanting regularity and so on. Agreeableness, which is on a continuum of warmth versus being cold or distant or paranoid, and conscientiousness, yeah, which is on a continuum of being organized and reliable versus being disorganized, careless, and so on. Okay, and you can see that on the continuum, there are clear implications of what's considered a positive end of the continuum, what's on the negative. Yeah, but each one is on a continuum, and the idea is that most people's personalities can be described along these five factors and where people stand on each of the five factors. Okay. Well, The TIPI is a test of how people may manifest each of the five factors, where they stand along each of those five factors, and can give you a pretty rough idea of one's personality functioning. And this is something we might talk about, might actually take the TIPI together in class. Okay, but we'll possibly get back to that when we meet face to face. As I mentioned before, the way trait theory works is that it is empirically driven. Yeah, it's not the idea that someone comes up with an idea like Freud and then examines things based on that theory, but it's more about collecting data and then seeing what the data has to say about and providing from there a framework or a theory about personality. And the way that's typically done is by examining a lot of specific behaviors and seeing how they correlate. Yeah. Well, what the big five traits seem to have demonstrated fairly consistently is that these five factors all are correlated with certain types of behaviors. Yeah. And what we'll do, probably more when we meet face to face, is we'll look at some specific behaviors and we'll look to see how, and I'm going to ask you, which of the factors seem to relate with each of these behaviors and on one end, which end of the continuum. Yeah, for example, is wanting to go to a party, or attending a lot of parties. Which factor would that be related to? Yeah. It's related to extroversion, introversion. Yeah, with people going to parties being on the extroverted side as opposed to the introverted side, things like that. But we'll go over these behaviors as they apply to the big five when we meet face to face. Let's go through these real quickly in the meantime. And moving right along. And here, now, as an aside, I want to make this clear. There are dozens of theories of personality. Yeah, we're just looking at some major perspectives or schools. You can think of these as larger groupings. Yeah. So besides the second school or approach, trait theories, there are also what's referred to as humanistic or existential theories of personality. Yeah, and these theories arose more in the 60s and early 70s, and they, on the humanistic side, there are attempts to explain personality more holistically. Yeah, so taking into account societal factors, cultural factors, and how people's personality may arise from that. Yeah. Existential theories, as you may surmise, arise from understanding personality based on how people resolve or address existential issues. Starting with the humanistic theories tend to make certain assumptions, and some of their assumptions is that people are self-deterministic. Yeah, that people make choices and have and come up with insights or ideas as to who they are based on cultural, societal experiences. So it's this idea of defining one's sense of self. Yeah. Who am I? Answering that question, who am I? Some of the major theorists associated with the humanistic approach include Abraham Maslow, who was a New York psychologist and developed this notion of a hierarchy of needs. Yeah, that our needs are on a hierarchy, starting with some basic needs such as safety and so on, but rising from there to the highest need, which is self-actualization. Yeah, or what's often characterized or defined as the need to fulfill one's potential, and potential including intellectual, spiritual, creative, and so on. Alrighty, so the idea that we have various needs, right? Safety, interpersonal, and then and finally with self-actualization. I'm just going very roughly. You have a more detailed, specific breakdown of the pyramid or hierarchy of needs in your textbook. But that's generally its function. You have from basic needs. Once we get those basic needs taken care of, we can be more concerned about interpersonal needs, social needs, right? Friends, family, loved ones, and then finally, self-actualization needs. Carl Rogers is another figure who didn't really have a theory of personality per se, but had a theory of explain. technically he did have a theory of personality, but it's very different from a lot of the prior theories of personality, like Freud's, and it doesn't attempt to come up with specific factors like trait theory, but it is an attempt to explain um, human nature and how we resolve issues. And the main issues for Rogers that he saw humans um, having to resolve are the ability to be genuine, yeah, to be honest with oneself and communicate that honesty with others. Unconditional positive regard, if we experience that, of being accepted by others unconditionally, and if we can do the same. And also, if we experience empathy and also can be empathic. Yeah, again, and like the larger category of humanistic theories, ultimately, in the end, um, how we resolve these challenges or these experiences comes to a culmination with our sense of self or a definition of who we are. Okay. And the existential, I kind of touched on its main characteristics, but I'll just leave it there. Let me talk about a fourth approach, the social cognitive approach. Yeah. Now, with the social cognitive, um, as a general matter, they do not come up with theories of personality per se, yeah, but it does recognize that people come up with certain um, uh, groupings of attitudes and behaviors, which may typically characterize a pattern, demonstrate a pattern, or characterize the individual's functioning, but without calling it a personality per se. Yeah. Um, so what we see isn't a personality per se, but a development of learned attitudes and behaviors and patterns of behaving. Um, and it's probably the most similar to the trait theories, yeah, but without coming up with specific traits like um, extroversion, introversion, agreeableness. For the social cognitive school, what's more important is to examine patterns of beliefs, yeah, or patterns of behaviors, but without labeling them as the trait theories do. Okay, it recognizes that individuals have different each of us have a different sense of personal control. Yeah, and in particular, the concept that relevant to this is the idea of locus of control. Yeah, do we see ourselves being internally driven, having an internal sense locus of control, like I can control what grades I have by working hard and so on, or is it external? Yeah, do I attribute my performance academically more to where I am, what instructor I have, what class I registered for? Uh, People can also develop a certain pattern of behaving referred to as learned helplessness. Yeah, you may recall this discussion in your text. So people will have varying patterns of learned helplessness, some more than others, some in a particular fashion, and that's what may be described as a personality characteristic. Though this is not personality theory, learned helplessness is not personality theory per se. And with that, that's all I have to say about this chapter on personality. And with that, we're finished with this chapter. And I will see you when we talk about our next chapter. And with that, again, thank you for your attention. And I will see you later. Take care. Have a good one. Bye bye.